The entire gym went silent when the young fighter laughed at the old man standing near the heavy bags. The old man looked nothing like a warrior. His shoulders were slightly rounded, his gray hair was thinning, and one knee seemed stiff as he walked. He wore a faded sweatshirt, worn sneakers, and carried a small canvas bag over one shoulder. The young fighter looked him up and down and laughed loud enough for everyone to hear, telling him that he looked too weak and too old to be anywhere near a fighting gym. A few people smiled nervously. Nobody expected what happened next. The old man took one slow step forward, and within seconds, the young champion was on the floor, staring at the ceiling, completely stunned. But the most shocking part was not that the old man had dropped him. It was what the old man did afterward. He reached down, offered him a hand, and quietly asked if he was hurt. Because the man standing there was not looking for a fight. He was a retired Navy SEAL who had spent a lifetime learning that the strongest person in the room is often the one with the least need to prove it. If you believe in kindness, humility, and second chances, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, leave a comment, and subscribe to Dad's Soul Diaries. Sometimes the person we underestimate is carrying a story we could never imagine. The gym was called Iron Harbor, an old training center on the edge of a quiet coastal town where retired athletes, young competitors, police officers, and ordinary people came to learn discipline. The walls were covered with photographs of champions and handwritten notes from students who had gone on to compete professionally. At the center of the room was 26-year-old Jarek Sloan, a regional martial arts champion who had recently become convinced that nobody in the gym could touch him. Jarek was fast, powerful, and naturally gifted. He had won 14 consecutive amateur fights and had started training for a professional debut. Unfortunately, his success had begun changing him. He no longer corrected beginners patiently. He laughed when someone made mistakes. He believed age meant weakness and physical size meant strength. His coach, Master Corvin Hale, repeatedly warned him that arrogance was the easiest way for a talented fighter to become a dangerous fool, but Jarek thought the old master's warnings were simply outdated wisdom. That morning, the gym was crowded with students preparing for a weekend demonstration. Jarek had just finished a hard sparring session when the front door opened. An older man walked inside carrying a canvas bag. His name was Everett Shaw. He was 61 years old, although his quiet movements made him seem older from a distance. He had come to ask whether the gym needed someone to repair several damaged storage cabinets and reinforce a loose section of the training floor. He had spent years doing carpentry and maintenance work after leaving the military, and Master Corvin knew him through a local community center. Everett wasn't there to train. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He simply wanted to earn enough money to help his granddaughter, Maeve, who had recently started living with him while her mother worked in another state. Everett stood near the wall and waited while Master Corvin inspected the measurements he had brought. Jarek noticed him and immediately began making jokes. He told the other fighters that the gym must be hiring security guards now. He laughed about Everett's gray hair and stiff knee. Everett ignored him. He simply looked toward the training floor and watched the students. His eyes moved differently from everyone else's. He didn't stare at fists. He watched shoulders, hips, balance, exits, and distance. Master Corvin noticed. He had seen that kind of awareness before, but he said nothing. Jarek wasn't satisfied with being ignored. He walked over and deliberately stood in Everett's path. He told the old man that if he planned on working around fighters, he should at least learn how to stay out of their way. Everett calmly stepped aside. Jarek smiled and told him that he looked weak enough to fall over from a strong breeze. Some students laughed. Everett looked at him for a moment and said that appearances could be misleading. Jarek laughed even harder and asked whether the old man was trying to threaten him. Everett shook his head and said no. He had no interest in fighting anyone. That answer made Jarek more confident, and he challenged Everett to prove that he wasn't afraid. Master Corvin immediately stepped between them and ordered Jarek back to training. Jarek reluctantly obeyed, but the humiliation burned inside him. He couldn't understand why the old man refused to react. It felt like Everett's silence was an insult. During the next hour, Jarek trained harder than necessary, striking the heavy bag with enough force to make the chains rattle. Everett continued working on the cabinet in the corner. Every few minutes, his eyes quietly returned to Jarek. Then something unexpected happened. Jarek lost his footing while practicing a spinning technique. His ankle twisted slightly, and his body began falling toward the wooden edge of a storage platform. Before anyone else could react, Everett moved. He crossed the space with startling speed, caught Jarek's upper arm, redirected his momentum, and guided him safely onto the mat. The movement was so smooth that most people didn't even understand what they had witnessed. Everett immediately released him and stepped away. Jarek stared at him. For the first time that morning, there was no laughter. Everett asked if his ankle was okay. Jarek said it was fine. Everett nodded and returned to the cabinet. Master Corvin watched him closely. He knew that wasn't the movement of an ordinary handyman. Later that afternoon, Master Corvin asked Everett whether he had ever trained seriously. Everett hesitated before admitting that he had served in the United States Navy many years earlier. He didn't elaborate. Corvin asked whether his training had been military. Everett simply said that he had learned some things while serving. Then he changed the subject. Jarek overheard enough to become curious. He began searching for information about Everett Shaw. What he found was almost nothing. That bothered him. The next day, Everett returned to finish the repair work. Jarek approached him with a different attitude but still carried the same pride. He asked whether Everett had been Special Forces. Everett didn't answer directly. Jarek laughed and said that he had probably been an ordinary sailor who was exaggerating his past. Everett smiled faintly and told him that there was no reason for Jarek to believe him. Jarek took that as permission to mock him again. This time, he challenged Everett to a controlled sparring match. The gym became silent. Master Corvin refused at first, but Everett surprised everyone by saying he would accept one condition: there would be no striking to injure, no humiliation, and no anger. Jarek agreed immediately. He believed he would make the old man look foolish in front of everyone. They stepped onto the mat. Jarek bounced lightly on his feet. Everett stood almost completely still. His hands were relaxed. His breathing was slow. His posture looked ordinary. Jarek smiled. He rushed forward. What happened next lasted only a few seconds. Everett moved sideways. Jarek's first attack missed. Everett redirected his momentum. Jarek tried to recover. Everett shifted again. Suddenly Jarek was off balance. A controlled movement sent him down onto the mat. There was no dramatic punch. No brutal strike. No angry expression. Just perfect timing. Jarek immediately tried to stand. Everett allowed him to. Jarek rushed again. The same thing happened. A turn. A step. A redirection. The young champion hit the mat a second time. The gym was completely silent. Jarek's face turned red. He attacked a third time, faster and harder. Everett waited until the final instant, stepped inside the attack, controlled Jarek's balance, and dropped him cleanly onto the mat. Jarek landed safely but was completely stunned. He stared upward, unable to understand how an older man with a stiff knee had defeated him so easily. Everett immediately offered him a hand. Jarek hesitated. Then he accepted it. Everett pulled him upright and quietly asked whether he was okay. That question hit Jarek harder than the takedown. He had expected laughter. He expected humiliation. Instead, the man he had mocked was worried about him. Jarek asked how Everett had learned to move like that. Everett looked toward Master Corvin. The old instructor nodded. Everett finally told them the truth. He had served as a Navy SEAL. He had spent years training for situations where hesitation could cost lives. He had operated in environments where physical strength mattered, but awareness, patience, discipline, and teamwork mattered more. He had watched friends leave for missions and never return. He had carried memories home that he rarely discussed. After retiring, Everett had promised himself that he would never use his training to prove himself again. He had a granddaughter now. Maeve was 10 years old. She was the center of his life. He wanted her to know him as the grandfather who fixed bicycles, made pancakes on Sunday mornings, and helped her with homework. Not as the man he had once been. Jarek stood quietly. He finally understood why Everett had refused to respond to his insults. The old man wasn't weak. He was disciplined enough not to need revenge. But Everett's story didn't end with military service. His greatest struggle had begun after he came home. For years, ordinary life had felt strangely difficult. Loud noises could make him tense. Crowded rooms made him uncomfortable. He found himself automatically checking doors and windows wherever he went. He struggled to sleep. He had lost friends and carried guilt over things he could not change. He had eventually learned to live with those memories, but he never pretended they disappeared. His granddaughter had helped him more than anyone. Maeve once asked him why he always looked at the doors when entering a room. Everett had told her that old habits sometimes stayed with people. She asked whether he was scared. He told her that courage wasn't about never being scared. It was about learning how to live even when fear was present. That sentence stayed with Jarek. A few weeks later, something happened that changed the entire gym. During an afternoon class, a delivery truck lost control outside the building and crashed through a section of the parking barrier. The impact sent debris across the entrance. Students panicked. A young boy froze near the doorway while adults rushed in different directions. Everett reacted instantly. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He moved toward the children, guided them away from the danger, checked the exits, and organized the adults into a calm evacuation. Jarek followed him without hesitation. For the first time, Jarek wasn't trying to be the strongest person in the room. He was simply trying to help. When emergency crews arrived, everyone was safe. Everett sat against the wall afterward. His hands were shaking. Jarek noticed. The champion who had once mocked the old man now sat beside him. He didn't ask about military missions. He didn't ask for stories. He simply stayed. Everett looked at him and smiled. He told Jarek that he had finally learned the difference between strength and ego. Jarek nodded. He admitted that he had been afraid of becoming ordinary. Everett told him there was nothing wrong with being ordinary. Being kind was harder. Being humble was harder. Being responsible for someone else's safety was harder. And those were the things that mattered. From that day forward, Jarek changed. He began helping younger students. He stopped laughing when beginners made mistakes. He started listening to Master Corvin. He even began visiting Everett outside the gym, sometimes bringing Maeve small gifts or helping repair things around the house. The two men became unlikely friends. Jarek eventually earned his professional opportunity. Before his first professional fight, he asked Everett for advice. Everett told him not to fight to prove that he was better than anyone else. Fight to become better than the person he had been yesterday. Those words stayed with Jarek as he stepped into the ring. He won that night. But when reporters asked him afterward who had influenced his fighting style the most, he didn't mention his championship trophies or famous coaches. He mentioned an old man who had once walked into a gym carrying a toolbox. Years later, Everett's granddaughter grew into a confident young woman. She learned martial arts herself, not because her grandfather wanted her to become a fighter, but because he wanted her to understand discipline and self-respect. One afternoon, she found an old photograph of Everett from his military days. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at the gray-haired grandfather sitting nearby repairing a broken chair. She realized both men were the same person. But she loved the second one more. The man who had survived danger but chosen peace. The man who could hurt people but preferred helping them. The man who had every reason to become hard but had somehow remained gentle. Jarek never forgot that first day. He remembered laughing at Everett. He remembered calling him weak. He remembered watching him drop him onto the mat without anger. But most of all, he remembered the hand Everett offered afterward. Because that hand taught him something no championship ever could. Winning a fight is temporary. The way you treat someone after the fight can stay with them for the rest of their life. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Dad's Soul Diaries. Every interaction helps these stories reach more people who may need a reminder that strength doesn't always look the way we expect. And before we reach the final moment, please comment, "True strength is humility," if you believe the strongest people don't need to prove themselves. Years later, when Jarek became a respected instructor, a nervous teenager walked into his gym for the first time. The boy was small, awkward, and clearly terrified. A few older students laughed quietly when they saw him struggling to tie his belt. Jarek immediately remembered Everett. He walked over. He knelt down. He helped the boy fix the knot. Then he told him that nobody walks into a new place knowing everything. The boy looked relieved. Jarek smiled. For a moment, he could almost hear Everett's voice reminding him that everyone deserves the chance to become stronger. On the wall of Jarek's office hung a single photograph. It showed Everett standing outside Iron Harbor Gym, holding his worn canvas bag. Underneath the photograph was a simple sentence: "The strongest person in the room is often the one who has nothing to prove." Everett eventually became older. His steps became slower. His knee bothered him more. He stopped repairing cabinets and spent more time with Maeve. But every now and then, he still visited the gym. Students who had once known him only as an old man now greeted him with respect. Jarek always walked over to him. They would shake hands. No ceremony. No applause. No mention of medals. Just two men who had learned something from each other. Jarek had taught Everett that his past could still be used for good. Everett had taught Jarek that strength without humility was nothing more than insecurity wearing a strong face. And that was the real reason the young fighter had been dropped cold that day. It wasn't because Everett was stronger. It wasn't because he was faster. It wasn't even because he was a retired Navy SEAL. Jarek had been defeated by something much deeper. He had been defeated by his own arrogance. And Everett had given him the rarest victory of all, the chance to become a better man. Because sometimes life puts an old man in front of us when we're expecting a weak opponent. Sometimes it sends someone quiet when we're waiting for someone loud. And sometimes the person we laugh at is the person who teaches us the lesson we needed most. Everett never asked anyone to call him a hero. He never told people about the missions. He never displayed medals. He simply lived his life quietly, loved his granddaughter, helped his neighbors, and taught anyone willing to listen that courage was not about how hard you could hit. It was about how carefully you chose when to use your strength. The young black belt had once laughed and called him weak. But years later, Jarek understood the truth. Everett wasn't weak. He was simply strong enough to know that he didn't have to prove it.